Marie-Diane Meissirel is here with us today. Born of a French father and an American mother, Marie-Diane is the fourth daughter of a family of 7 girls. After completing her studies in Paris at Sciences Po and HEC, she started exploring the world, spending 5 years in Croatia, 5 years in Greece, 6 years in Hong Kong, and now in Singapore, where she is called home for the last 2 years. In January of this year, Marie-Diane published her 4th book, Les Accords Silencieux, a novel that takes readers on a musical voyage that links the destiny of 2 women through time from New York to Shanghai and Hong Kong. Since publishing her first novel in Athens in 2012, Marie-Diane has experienced firsthand the evolution of the publishing industry. From the growing demand of audiobooks to the growth of book summary platforms and the increasingly critical role of technology and social media platforms. It is a pleasure to have Marie-Diane here with us today as we delve into the journey of an author and what it takes to practice this craft in 2022. Welcome, Marie-Diane.
Thank you for having me. Bonjour, Ariane.
Bonjour. Listen, for all of us who don't speak French, I would love for you to explain to us in the audience what the title of your book means and take us through the inspiration behind your novel.
So the book is called Les Accords Silencieux. It has a double meaning because if you would translate it, it could be the silent agreements or the silent chords. And actually, I really love the title, and I say it even more because it's not from my inspiration. It was a gift from my publisher, and I really want to emphasize that point because even if it's 2022 and time for self-publishing, I still believe that a publisher has a lot to bring to the writer. And the example of the title is, this title is good to show it. For me, it's perfect because it brings up the poetic aspect of this book, which plays on, it's really about what we call in French, the correspondance des âmes, so the correspondence of souls. I don't know if that really has the same meaning in English, but this kind of dialogue between souls is something that is doesn't come with words. It can travel through time and space. It's something a bit mysterious. You need to be following signs and believe in a bit of magic somehow. And I think this title really captures this whole idea that you find through the book. And it plays really on the idea of the music, which is something that's that you'll find all through the book. So yeah, this title is wonderful to me.
Tell us about the music. Actually, do you have a background in music or musicology? Obviously, the book also has a beautiful playlist attached to it that the audience can listen to. I'd love to take us through the journey of the musical journey itself. Did you have to read up on the music and learn it yourself, or is this something you've always just admired and known about yourself?
So music plays a great part in my life. I'm not a musician. I did learn how to play the violin when I was younger, but I guess I was not really talented for that, but it really gave me the taste for music. But that comes, actually, I'll have to go more backwards. And I think it's important that I tell you about that because it's probably one of the beginning of the book is when I was growing up in Paris. So my mom, who is American, she thought it was really important to welcome foreigners in Paris because she had been through that journey herself, and it's never really easy. And actually, the flat where we lived was very close to the Conservatoire, the Paris Conservatoire, where a lot of students from everywhere in the world come, the best students. We were hosting every year, we were hosting different students. So we had pianists from Japan, Iran, from Poland, And they would actually play on my mom's piano, and she would also give recitals, so that would give them a chance also to play in front of an audience. So I was very lucky to grow up with this outstanding music, and especially with people who were speaking so different languages, but they had one in common, which was music. So I think that really inspired me all my life, that music for me is, doesn't need words, it speaks directly to your soul. And I really knew that one day I would write about that. And somehow I've realized it wasn't a plan at the beginning, but now that I've finished the book, I know it's also a way of, saying how grateful I am for music to be part of my life. And I hope people will feel that, and that as they go through the book, and maybe as they listen to the playlist that I've put up on Spotify with all the pieces that I refer to in the book, that readers will experience also this communication that we can have, and that maybe it will bring them closer to my characters, maybe closer to me as well, to my whole thoughts and whatever feelings I've tried to put into the book.
That's fabulous. It's fabulous. You mentioned it wasn't in the plan to begin with. What was in the plan to begin with? What does the plan look like? Is there a plan? How does that entire process look for you when you're just beginning to think about a book? You're thinking about characters and a plot, and obviously, from everything you've mentioned, you bring a lot of what is important to you in life. Those experiences that have obviously left an impression on you into your writing. How do those thoughts and experiences come together? How do you structure the process? And tell us about your first inspirations for these Accords Silencieux.
So it's a very long process. It's not a one morning idea that, it's, for me, it really looked like a puzzle of lots of thoughts that I've been having, and that's suddenly maybe one morning, it's not just one morning, but there was a moment when the pieces just got together. And so just to give you an idea of these different pieces, one was I wanted to write on Hong Kong. I moved to Hong Kong in 2014. I also had been a student in Hong Kong in 2003. Yeah. So I had experienced Hong Kong as a student. I was coming back as an expat and a mom. And I felt very close to this student world. And it's a world that was going through a lot of changes. And I wanted to know what, these young Hong Kong people, what were their dreams. And so I started going to universities, meeting students. And I met a lot of also students from mainland China, and I had the most interesting talks. But to be honest, I could go on and go on having coffees with nice students, but the idea for the book was not really coming up, which was a bit of a frustration. And you don't want to force a topic if you're going to write a fiction. It has to, I think it's good to have a topic, but at one point it has to cross your own journey as a person, to become very personal. Not that I'm going to write about something that's personal, but so that I can bring something where I put a lot of my own soul and to make it meaningful. So that was not really happening. At the same time, my grandfather in the US was at the end of his life, and he had to leave his home where he had lived almost all his life. So he had been able and very lucky to be able to collect and keep every single memories from his parents down to his own children and grandchildren, and his amazing aunt who had been traveling her whole life around the world. So that means postcards from the 30s, from anywhere in the world, Egypt, Philippines, Chile. She went everywhere, and all these postcards are there. And then a lot of pictures, a lot of family pictures, great picture that really, I had time these summers to sort out all his things. And at the same time, because he was still very, physically he was down, but his mind was so clear that I could question him. And we had the most amazing exchanges. And sometimes I feel maybe it's a bit selfish, because it was a hard time for him to be stuck in bed in the hospital. But I'm so grateful for all the things he shared with me at that time. And that brings me very far from my Hong Kong students. But somehow I felt I want to connect these worlds. I don't know how. And that was the thing. I want to talk about memory, about how lucky some of us are to carry all these memories and to have like those physical memories of pictures and everything. But we know that a lot of people in the world don't have this luxury, and maybe it's just the words, things that will be transmitted from grandparents to children, grandchildren. And I felt that gap between, especially the students I was meeting from China, who didn't know much about their past. And even though they were very close to their grandparents, because as we know, a lot of them, I mean, most of them at that age were single child, and raised by 4 grandparents, but they didn't know much, didn't have much. And I thought, I want to play, I mean, not play, but I want to think about that, the difference. And so that was something that was rolling in my head. And somehow the music came, and that was the music, and the idea of building the whole novel around a piano just brought everything together. It brought generations, because as you mentioned it in your introduction, but the book is really organized around 2 characters, which is one old lady, an American lady who lives in Hong Kong, who has this Steinway, can't play anymore because she's too old and can't do it, and it's a heartbreaker for her. So she welcomes the students, and the student who comes to play on her piano is this young girl from Shaanxi in province in China, who is starting her journey as a student in Hong Kong. She has given up the piano when she was younger for some reason that we don't know at the beginning of the book. And these 2 women are going to connect, I mean, in a way that is almost beyond understanding. And that's what the book is going to explain, going back in the past of this American woman. So traveling back to New York in the 30s, and then also traveling back in the past of this piano, because this piano was sent at the beginning of last century from New York, from the Steinway factory, to Shanghai, where it was bought by a very rich, very wealthy Chinese family. And so that piano had its own journey. And I take the reader through all of that and show how these 2 women, which don't seem to have much in common, apart from music, which is already a lot, but they are connected. There is a secret behind their encounter, and it's, it was their fate to meet. And so that's how it started. So it's strange how I never thought about this story specifically. It was really, I think, when you are a writer, you have a lot of ongoing stories. And this was probably one of the big learnings from working on that book, is that not to give up the story, even though I have the feeling it's not leading to one book. I think it's good to cultivate, or to have several threads going, because at one point they might meet.
Interesting.
And
Interesting. I mean, obviously, as you're speaking about the plot, you can tell that it was a very organic process. I thoroughly understand you didn't sit down and actually write the table of contents one day and said, okay, I'm going to start writing. In fact, as you're telling the story is unraveling before us. And I guess I would love to learn a little bit more about that process itself. um, how do these different stories in your mind, in your experience, in your life, come together concretely? Are you writing down notes and researching different threads of thinking on a daily basis, and developing character and plot, and sort of going back to the drawing board the next day and saying, no, this doesn't work, or this does work? Or is there something, is there an intuition that says, this sounds right to me, this feels right to me? After all, the characters you've created are not like you, right? They're very different. So it requires that you put yourself in their shoes. Take us through that process of weeding through the threads that are obviously in your mind, and how you actually evolve into the story yourself.
Mm-hmm. I think, and that will sound a bit, I will give it a bit as a personal advice. I keep a journal, and I have actually two journals. One is my personal diary. I don't know if it's of much interest for anyone, but for me at least, it helps me go through and back. And I try to really put a lot of my feelings, and it's very interesting, to go back in time. But that's the personal thing. And then I have another journal where, I write down all these threads that I was talking about. So they are ongoing. It's a bit messy, but at least I keep track. Sometimes it's a bit of research that I'm doing and I'm putting it there, and or I have an idea of a character, or sometimes it's just a piece of dialogue, or so it's ongoing, it's there. But when it comes to really, once the idea of the book, like what I say, when I had this idea of working on the piano, and how, so as I say before, the piano really helped me to bring together two worlds, two different type of researchers I was leading. So the piano really came as a as a key that and opened the door to everything. And from that moment, actually, it was very clear I had my story in mind. The whole story, not the details, but the whole idea. And for me, and I know it's not the case of all writers, but for me, the structure is key. I need it. I need a structure to move on. It's a bit, I like to compare it to a travel plan. We don't do that much more anymore. But when I was younger, and I did a lot of backpacking, and thinking, okay, I'm leaving for 1 month in India, and I'm going to go from Mumbai to, let's say, Madras and to Chennai, and you have a month, you have your ticket, so you kind of have the boundaries, that there are some highlights you don't want to miss, but who are you going to meet on the road? Where are you going to be sick? What will be, the idea you didn't have in mind, something that was not in the guidebook? This you don't know, but you have this kind of perspective that, these are the key people, like, I don't know, friends that you're supposed to meet at one point. So that's somehow how I build my structure. So it's not detailed. It's just like, I feel there are some points that can't be missed. And then, so I put that down, and it's actually, when I go back, it took me several years to write this book. So when I go backwards in my books and I see the day I've put down this structure, and to be honest, I didn't change much from that structure. I'm like, wow, how did this come out? But I think it was really like that. And then, of course, then comes the work on the characters. And again, this is a long story. It covers 100 years. It covers different continents, different families, a lot of characters. So, I really did it like the American side of the story, the Chinese side of the story, going from grandparents to, each generation, and then detailing, and then, which are the characters that are going to stand out. And then I really have the whole backbone. And I like to say that you need to know everything about your characters, even all the things you will never tell in the book. But you need to know who, of course, where they were born, when, whatever. That's obvious. But, who were their parents? How did they grow up? Where? What were their feelings? And try to really picture their whole life and have it there, So I do that for each of my characters. I love the moment when I name the character. This is something I really like. And that was fun for the Chinese part because I don't speak Chinese. So it was a bit, I did have a Chinese teacher because I was trying to learn Chinese, but was not very successful. But it was really, really interesting, because you have to think of something that has a meaning to you, because it remains something very personal. They are your creatures, so you need to it's a way of connecting with them. At the same time, it has to be relevant in time, where people name that way in China in these times. So this I had to consult, and Chinese names have so many different meanings, and you can write them with different characters. But so that was a very interesting process. But this is just to tell you how much comes into building the character, putting the flesh, imagining what they look like. And this is where on the American side, what really helped me was all these pictures I had from my family. And actually, I can show you the cover of my book, which is
actually a picture of your
I don't know if you can see it properly, but this picture means a lot because that's my grandmother, even though the story is really not something about my family, but somehow this character of the old woman in the book, Old American Woman, she has dates that are quite similar to my grandmother, so she could have looked that way. She's the silhouette is really how I imagine my character, and that's because I've been using all these photographs from my family, and especially photographs from my grandma, and that really helped me building my characters. So that's the structure, the characters. And then, because especially this book is it's not a historical book novel, I wouldn't call it that way, because then you would expect maybe that I would go much deeper into each period. This is not what I'm trying to do, even though I did the work because I had to.
Why did you have to? Because otherwise the characters and the plot would
yeah, it's in order to be close to be as realistic as possible, I needed to know, what was their life at the time, and who they would meet, how they would dress, what they would eat, which music they would listen to. That was mainly important, because all my characters are music lovers. So what they would listen to was very important. And let's say the character of Tilly, which is the American woman, when you see her in the 30s in New York, she's a teenager. I mean, a young woman. She's 18, in her 20s, early 20s. She comes from a classical music family, but she loves jazz. She's discovering all these new sounds. She wants to sing herself. So I had to, go through all of that, listen to all these Benny Goodman discs, and that's the beauty of writing, having Spotify, for example, because I could dig in and get all this music in the background and really put myself in their shoes, as you were saying earlier. So it's a lot of research to build up the context, and I think probably the way someone can research today is very different from how you would do it before, because there's so much that you can find just from the internet. So I mentioned Spotify for the music, but let's say so the piano is a Steinway, so I did a lot of research on Steinway itself. So of course I read a lot of books, but then Steinway as a company has a lot of material online. You can actually visit the factory just sitting in front of your computer, I really wanted to go. Unfortunately, in the summer, they're closed when I go in the, this is when I usually go to the US. So I hope one day I can see it for real. But going through all their videos, it really felt like I went there.
That's amazing.
And then let's say Carnegie Hall has quite an importance in the book as well. If you go on the Carnegie Hall website, there's a lot of archives. The New York Symphony website, you can find all the programs from up to the beginning of the history of the orchestra. So any performance that I mentioned in the book has taken place. I want it to be as accurate as possible. So even though, you know, it doesn't matter so much for the narration, for the story, but for me, it really puts me into a context, which is very important. So it's
immersive.
Yeah, so that space is a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of watching documentaries, movies, listening to music. So a lot of work, but this is also how, and this is to go back to my idea of the traveling map. This is also how I met unexpected characters, you know, digging through history and aspects of history that I maybe was not that familiar with. And this, I can talk about the Chinese side, for example, which I didn't know so well. Some characters felt irrelevant or not of main importance. They could become a second lead in the play, let's say. So but this comes up as I'm researching and realizing that it's more important to focus on that. And then another part of the research or the work, at least for this book, and it felt very important, is as I was in Hong Kong, I started reading poetry a lot, which I had not been doing. So, I mean, as a younger student, maybe I was reading poetry, but I kind of stopped, and that was a bit out of my life. And I really went back to reading poetry because I wanted to know a bit more about Chinese poetry. Of course, again, I couldn't read it in Chinese, but we are lucky that we have in France a very bright author called François Cheng, who is a poet himself, who writes novels in French, but he's been one of the main translators of Chinese poetry. And so through him, through his own poem, his word, it really helped me finding my own words. And this was a very important step in writing that book. And that's the fourth one. And this is also to emphasize how, you know, being a writer is a journey. You evolve constantly. And what I felt with this book is by being more sensible or sensitive to poetry, it really also, and maybe because it was the poetry, it was the music I was listening to at the same time, I was encouraged to really try to find my own language somehow, which maybe I didn't work that much for my previous books. And it felt very important. For me, it felt like, okay, this is a new step in my writing. And this really came from all this reading, discovering of poetry, and trying to also experience that poetry by, you know, when you live in Hong Kong, it's this urban city, but it's the nature is fabulous there. And I was so lucky I could go for long walks every day. And I just felt, you know, going out there with the poems, the words, the music, gave to the whole environment another dimension. And that really helped me finding my own language. And that's what I felt was a big step in writing that book compared to the previous ones.
I mean, listening to you speak about all of the different resources that you used in order to perform the research you have, in order to immerse yourself in that world, it really does contextualize the work of an author today in a way that I think you probably have noticed yourself, you know, since the beginning of your career. as an author back in the 2010, 2012, when you first published your first novel in Athens. I assume so many platforms, so many resources and archives, as you were mentioning, and the digitization of a lot of work, both in as far as written work, but also obviously audio recordings and so on that are available for people to be able to really recreate what was going on in the past, and truly understand the details of life that we've never been a part of. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I'd love to hear how you did this process, how the research looked for your first novel. How did you tackle that first novel? I think every young person listening to this podcast right now is going to be asking that question. How do you pick up your pencil or your pen and begin that first step in your journey? And right now it sounds like obviously the path you've been on is so multidimensional. Take us through that first time and what you drew upon as inspiration and what resources you were using 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So it's so I've always been writing, but not fiction. And to be very honest, and I know you also lead this interview in terms of career and how you can see your path forward. I always had writing as something very personal in my life. Reading and writing has always been key in my life, but I always felt it's something very personal. I wouldn't say a hobby because it doesn't characterize well, but I didn't see it as a career as such. I didn't write fiction as I was younger. I wrote a lot of, I love letters because I have a family who is, I lived in France. My grandparents were in the US. I've always been writing letters, especially to them. And then I started traveling. I was writing to them and to other people afterwards. And then I had travel blogs. And that was actually in terms of technology. And I think about my first travel blog where you need to know how to code a little bit.
Pretty revolutionary.
Yeah, the basics. But when I see how easy it is today, wow, what a change. Because I could see myself in India more than 20 years ago, trying to upload my blog post, and it was a nightmare, and then the internet was terrible, and so it seems like another age. But I always had in mind, like, I wish one day I can write a novel. I always had all these stories in my head. I love telling stories. But mainly to myself.
Marie-Diane, were you thinking that when you were in Sciences Po? Were you thinking that when you were at HEC? What were you thinking when we were doing your studies? I mean, what path did you have in mind, and how did this transition occur for you?
I really didn't see the writing as an option. As I said, that was part of my personal sphere.
What were your options? I mean, what was your thinking?
So I did, I always liked writing, and that was, more one of my skills than any scientific skills or whatever. So after when I finished high school, I did 1 year of prep school, which was a literary course. That was to prepare my entrance to Sciences Po, which is political sciences, but it's also a prep school that people do in order to become teachers, to go into the École Normale, which is really the highest classes to become a history or French teacher or whatever. So it's really strong education in literature, philosophy, history, geography, a lot of writing, of course, and which I really enjoy, but I didn't do it for that purpose. It was just a way, it was a good way for me to get prepared for the exam for Sciences Po. So for me, when I started, I did have in mind journalism. That was an option I had in mind when I started my education.
Did you dabble? Did you dabble in journalism? Did you try?
No. It kind of went off the side. because the main thing was I wanted to travel. I don't know if that's a career path, but I wanted to travel. Because I was studying politics, a lot of people go into the diplomatics, or I was dreaming of UN, joining a UN agency. I would read The Economist and see all these ads, and I was like, wow, this sounds amazing. Even though I felt like I don't have the skills, I don't have the, nobody gets into these, or how when you see these ads and they're very impressive somehow. But I was dreaming about that until I did an internship for the European Commission, and somehow I was not really keen on the bureaucratic kind of work.
Tell me about your internship. It's so important. I mean, one of the things we always obviously talk about and really try to encourage young people to explore internships early on in their careers. Tell me how you found the internship at the European Commission, what your experience was. Did you have mentorship? Were you doing something of value that you felt was meaningful? Tell me a little bit about that.
So it was, I think it was at the end of my first year in Sciences Po. I found it through one of my teachers who introduced me to his sister who worked there, and that's how I got into it. So I think it's very important I had very close relationship with my teachers when I was a student, and it has helped me a lot, because I think it's very important to be able to share what you think, what your projects, so I was very lucky that I had some students who really mentored me, and this particular history teacher has been one of them. And so through him, I got that internship. It was in Paris, actually, so I didn't travel. It was the delegation of the commission in Paris. It made things also easier, because it's nice to want to travel, but when you're an intern, very often, and especially in these kind of internship, you're not paid, or at least you were not 20 years ago. So somehow it was easier to stay at home and do that internship. It was very interesting, and because I immediately had a good relationship with the woman who hired me. She trusted me, and I got to do quite a lot. But I realized that what we were working on was bureaucratic is maybe not the term, but I felt it was very far from real life. I realized how much for me it was important I wanted to be out there where it's happening, rather than in an office writing reports on things that sounded very abstract, even though it was tackling things that are very important, for, let's say, the farming industry or so. I'm not minimizing the work. It's just, for me, it was too much of, I really realized I was not into law. All the legal part was not my interest. I was not really keen into that political world. And that's something I really realized being there. I felt it was a bit out of touch.
Sure.
And that what I was looking for was something a bit more grounded.
That's great. So you had direction, obviously. You had more direction around what you wanted and what you were looking for.
Yeah.
What was the next step?
The next step that I really, and it's going to sound like repetition, but I really wanted to travel. So and I wanted to, because I had this idea of the UN agency, I also wanted to, and I had this experience of working in an office, which, the European Commission is not the UN, it's different work, but it's a big organization. And I realized I want to be on the field. I was interested in development issues and humanitarian issues. And so I thought I want to do something very tangible, and I will volunteer. So that was my next plan for the next internship, and I had always been very fascinated by India. There's a famous book that became actually it's a famous French book that became a very famous American movie, but it's called La Cité de la Joie, the City of Joy. I read that book when I was maybe 16, and ever since then, I wanted to go to India. I mean, a bit like an idealistic kind of, like a lot of, like we can be, and maybe I feel different now, but that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be there with the people, do something, even though I realized, but that's the next step. But so that was my plan. And I found, again, through family connections, but because I was talking about this thing, I want to go to India, I want to volunteer, but it's not that easy actually to. So again, I spoke about it, and then I met that lady who had been a donor for a school in South India, because it was a school for blind people, and that lady herself had a blind child, so whatever she could send to that school. So that's through her I got in touch with that school in India, and that's how I ended up going there for several months. And that was a big eye-opener, because, you know, as idealistic as I was, and I was like, oh, I want to help people. I know it sounds a bit maybe out of context or whatever, but I really wanted to do something good. But I realized I was useless. I mean, in a way that I'm not a carer. I mean, I'm not trained as a medic. I'm not an educator either. I'm not a proper manager. You know, what I'm learning, I'm studying politics, which is very general. It's great. I mean, I wouldn't change. I love my studies. It really opened my eyes to so many things, and I wouldn't be the writer that I am today if I had not gone through that school, I think. But, you know, while I was there, I felt like, I was sick. People had to take care of me instead of me helping. I realized, you know, this is far from what I thought when I was sitting in my nice house in Paris. But what I did there is, and this is where I think I was the most valuable, is that I was visiting all the rural families that were sending their kids to the school, and I was writing reports for all our donors. So I would actually sit, listen to people. You know, I had, of course, a questionnaire I had to go through, but it was also a matter of having their trust, getting to know them, learning that. And, you know, it was literally sitting there and watching what was going on, what was their life.
But also storytelling, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That is
yeah. And I realized at that very point, it really started, you know, coming to me that, you know, being a witness of something, being able to listen to people, listen to a story, and how do you bring it to an audience afterwards? Of course, an audience that is a donor's audience, who wants to hear something, but you're going to bring something that's true, but the way you narrate the story of these people is going to have an impact depending on how you tell the story. I was also taking pictures, and that's important because I love photography, and I think it really also played a role in that whole thing. And I remember in the evenings I was there, I was quite very much by myself, and I was like, I wish I could write a book about all these people and this experience, not my experience, but how life is there. And I want to share that with my crowd, you know, people who don't know that, who haven't had the chance or the possibility to experience what I've experienced there. So that I say that it took a very long time before I took my pen and really started writing a book. But I can really say that at that moment, I felt like if I can be of some use, this is how.
That's amazing. Amazing.
So that experience was really an eye opener, even though, as I say again, it took time afterwards.
And you know, at each stage, you embarked upon these internships and these different experiences, you know, led by the thought that perhaps this is what you would want to do, and you step back knowing what you didn't want to do. And really understanding the bits and pieces of those experiences that you actually truly enjoyed.
Mhm.
And you really did take that with you, obviously, throughout your career.
Yeah.
It's incredibly important, I think, for young people listening to this to understand that, all experiences that lead you somewhere don't necessarily always point you to where you want to go, but very often will demonstrate to you,
Mhm.
things that don't make you happy, experiences that you don't want to pursue, and that's just as important. Um,
Mhm.
I'd love to hear a bit about your daily life as a writer. So, obviously, a lot of people write about the discipline of a writer, and I think that discipline looks very different from writer to writer. Um, Take us through a day in the life of Marie-Diane, and I would say also more relevant to the current context. Take us through your collaboration with your publisher, which I assume was remote for the most part, if not almost completely, throughout the past 2 years. But importantly, start with your day. What does that
Mhm.
look like? And how are you collaborating remotely right now, um,
Mhm.
on something that is obviously so near and dear to you, and such a personal experience that one would think doesn't potentially translate very well remotely, but you've obviously made it translate beautifully. So tell us about that as well.
So, and it's going to be interesting with this book because I had no publisher when I was writing it. Because my previous publisher I knew was not able to publish another novel. They were changing their directions, so I was a bit left on my own, which was fine as I was writing because I think you need that independence in the whole creative process. It's very hard to speak about your book when it's still just an idea. It's very blurry. Whenever I start talking about it, it sounds like bubbling, and it's like so clear in my head, but when it comes out in words, it's just like doesn't sound interesting. Or so I think you really need that time by yourself. Uh, so I would say even if you have a publisher, I talk for myself. I mean, I don't know about everyone else, but um, I really need this phase of just by myself, brainstorming, making all these stories make sense before I can even speak about it to anyone. Uh, but about the daily life, especially in that phase where I'm writing without a publisher, is as you say, the discipline is super important in terms of having timings that are dedicated to your book. It doesn't have to be writing. I mean, in my case, because I do a lot of research, it's also how much time I am at my desk from that time to that time. I mean, I have children, so my time is depending on their time. Um, so I know that this is what I have available today, and I want to make it has to be dedicated to the book. As I mentioned earlier, I write my journal. And again, I think it's a great advice because it puts you into writing. So unless I really have something ongoing that I want to start with, I often start my day with my journal because it puts me in the state of writing. It's and it might not be very interesting. It might just be a few words about my day, something I read in the news, or the poem I read before. uh, it's something I write down. And or some people would like to meditate, or I think you need a transition into writing
Mhm.
because it's what you're creating doesn't exist
Right.
for anyone, not even for yourself.
Exactly,
So,
including to yourself.
you have to close your door. And, it always sounds like a cliche to speak about Victoria Woolf and a room for yourself, but this is so true. I
Mhm.
mean, you need to be able to close that door and be in your world and make this world be, and tell people it exists, you are somewhere. And because someone who's in that office at work, you don't disturb them. So it has to be the same here. You are in a world that, yeah, it doesn't exist to others, not now, but you need to believe that it exists, and you immerse yourself into that world. So that idea of a locked space, of having a ritual that puts you into the writing spirit. So may it be the journal or meditation or something, to cut. It's like a, comment dire, un sas, you build this wall.
All around you. Right.
Then I love the fact that I'm researching, because it's an easy way to get into work. And I love history. I love documentation, maybe a bit too much, because I can get lost in that part. And for me, it's the easy part. It's not that it's passive, because you're active, but I mean, the writing is so difficult. I love to say that I'm so lucky I can do what I like, and it's writing. But the writing phase for me is very, takes a lot of energy, and I need to, so it's not happening every day. But what's happening every day is to be at my desk, dedicating time to my book. If the book is ongoing, let's say now I haven't really started a real book, but I'm working on all these threads that we discussed.
Sure.
And so I take the time to dig these different options, and or to work even more on my journal, more than I would do when I'm writing, because the journal process really brings a lot. And if I'm writing, then like in the actual phase of writing the book, then it's very frustrating, because generally I procrastinate a lot. I'm just sitting in front of the computer and the time is just ticking. And generally it's just before the kids are about to come back, that it's coming. But I think when you're writing, and you read that a lot, but you deal with a lot of procrastination, and that's so hard, because you're alone. You need to find the energy yourself. It's difficult.
Do you have any hacks? What have you found? What tips would you give to a young aspiring writer who obviously, is living in the context of today with a lot of distractions? What do you do? What's your hack?
You need to cut off from everything. Keep your phone in another room. Cut all the, anything that's on your computer that may distract you. May your distractions be only your thoughts.
Sure.
Because these are good distractions.
Sure.
They might lead you somewhere. But I think it's one of the biggest difficulty nowadays, and is all the distractions, and not being able to just let your thoughts go. Just imagination, comes through a lot of, I have a sofa bed in my office, and it took me time to allow myself to just rest there. But I realize it's kind of useful and good, that I should, feel less guilty and just be there. And, or go out for a walk. I walk a lot, and walking kind of, when there's if I need to entangle something, it really helps to go out. But again, throughout the device, or just music. But even music can be a hassle, because then you're checking your phone for the right music. So I think it's really important to, if you're stuck or procrastinating or something, just let it be bored, something will come out. But just don't find an escape. Don't escape to something easy, because it's not going to solve the issue. I think the pure procrastination, which is actually going deep down into yourself, that's good. But the procrastination that takes you to to your phone or anything else. I say it because, of course, I'm like anyone else. I have to deal with that and these addictions of nowadays. And there's always a good reason, and that will probably lead us to our next topic. But yeah, I also I'm acting on my social networks. So I'm like, oh, that's work as well, you know, checking my Instagram or whatever. That's part of my work. But no, I'm not at that moment of writing. So, you know, you have to separate what is your writing, what is your promotion, what is your so that's what I do when I'm for the writing. When you were talking about the publisher, actually it's been an interesting and tough journey to find a publisher, being in Singapore during lockdowns and being, you know, not being able to fly back to France. And I really write just in French right now, so that means the French market. And this is where new texts have been very useful. Because through my Instagram, where I post a lot, and I can discuss that a bit later, but it really helped me get in touch with some publishers. Really, I found out that they were very reactive through that channel, and I've had really good contacts, and that was very spontaneous. You know, no introduction, just because I think because of what I put out, I assume, I don't know, but what I try to put out, let's say on my Instagram, for example, is really linked to my universe as a writer. I see it a bit as an open journal. I talked a lot about my journal, but the Instagram page, whatever it's called, profile, is for me my open journal and photo journal. I try to put a lot of poetry. I try, you know, a lot of the authors that inspire me, I put out there.
Where can we follow you on Instagram?
Yes, I hope you will. So it's, yeah, you'll find me under my name, Marie-Diane Meissirel. But I think that because of that very genuine approach that I have to it, it can give an idea of not who I am as a person, but as a writer. And you know, some publishers just happen to be following me without, you know, me having done anything. So then I thought, okay, if they're following me, then I can enter into a conversation with them, because they must have a bit of interest, maybe not for my words, but at least for the universe, for this kind of environment that I'm creating. So it has helped me getting in touch with people that otherwise, I mean, the French publishing world is a bit different from the English-speaking world, in the sense that we don't really work with agents. So if you don't know anyone in the publishing world, you just send out your manuscript. And actually, a lot of French publishers only take proper, real paper manuscript, you know, not just a PDF that you can send out. That would be maybe better for the environment. But so, you know, it really feels like sending a bottle to the sea. So if you can have somehow an access to someone, at least to just to check that, you know, would they be interested in that kind of text? Because maybe you didn't understand that this publisher is not really in the line of, and this is a strong advice, is you need to identify where your text belongs. And, you know, it takes a bit of time and research, but this will lead you to the right place. You know, if you know, you can't just send out manuscripts to, okay, so it's different if you go through an agent, but I guess agents are also, I'm not less familiar with that.
Probably know where
with
to
that.
Right.
But you need to have in mind which are the publishers that fit, you know, where is the fit?
Right.
So this is where social media has been very helpful in that sense. It didn't lead to any conclusion, but I had very good contacts, very good advice through people, which I found was great, the way they responded. And it came a bit as a surprise. And I thought that was great. And this is where I felt there is a value to what I'm trying to do on my social media, because there's always a time when you question it. Is it worth spending time on it? I found, because I tried to do it with that spirit that I described before, I realized that it was a great value for myself, because it has become some kind of a timeline for me that I can go back and see where I was a year ago, for example. So it has the same value as a journal, and also for what readers or publishers can see of who you are, what are you bringing, what's your environment. But to come to the publisher, I was introduced to that person, but it took time because of COVID, everything was delayed, and people were at home and not with their team, and they couldn't. So I had a contact through someone, but nothing really happened. So I was kind of giving up, but didn't want to give up. Was wondering if I should go for self-publishing or not. Why not? This is a big question. And finally, I had a meeting on Zoom with that potential publisher, and that was our first meeting, and it turned out very fruitful, and slowly we progressed towards working together. And so everything was through the phone, through Teams, whatever we were using, and
but you made it work.
And we worked, and it was, and this will bring me to a word on self-publishing, which I think there are really great options right now. So I'm not shading anything on self-publishing. I think there are great options, and sometimes it's just so hard to get published. And it can be, I've discussed that with other publishers who haven't picked my book, and they were like, I was interested, but the rest of the publishing house, it was not the mood of the moment, or there's so many factors that can lead to your book not finding a publisher. So what is important, I think, with the self-publishing is what matters to you. And I've realized for myself that I needed that recognition of, very honestly, I needed to be part of a publishing house. Sure. I needed that moment where I felt like, okay, this is really my work, and I want my work to be valued as a work by someone who wants to invest in me, who recognizes my value, who is ready to spend time, money, efforts. That I needed that. Not everybody needs that. I know that I wanted my work to be recognized as something professional, and that was the way for me. And then they helped me a lot. I mean, they had a great impact. They gave me amazing tips on how to improve my text. They offered me that amazing title. I'm able to have these beautiful books. It's wonderfully distributed. I have a PR who's fantastic. You're then part of something that is
bigger than yourself.
Really, it's really supporting you, and it's you want to give more when you're receiving more. It's a virtuous circle. So I think it's again, not everyone needs that, but this is where you really need to question yourself, what is important. And I already feel that being a writer is a very lonely experience. It's fine. Again, you also need to know yourself. Are you okay with that? I'm personally very okay with that. But at one stage, I need interaction. I need support. I need to progress as well. And there's a point where just by yourself, you make a lot of progress by yourself, but you also learn from others. So last June, when I was finally able to fly back to Paris, and so a few months after my first meeting on Zoom with my publisher, we met, And it was fantastic, you know, to walk into that place that is dedicated only to novels, and to feel that I was part of it was a great feeling. You know, it was no longer about me and my closed walls, and then, yes, to see the book in bookstores, and it's a great satisfaction.
But it's so clear that the theme of travel, obviously, you know, is so inherent in your journey, and it's so inherent in what you're doing. And you know, and when you talk about your book being available, you know, in all of these different places, online, offline, and having the opportunity to be able to, of course, talk about it on social media and reach people all over the world. You know, I think your goal of being someone who travels and who loves traveling has definitely been realized in many ways through your writing. Can we end with your advice to young people out there looking to enter this field, looking to be writers? What's the one piece of advice you would leave them with?
I'll have two, if you don't mind. One is to be very realistic on the fact that to make a living out of writing is, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but it's almost impossible if it's just writing fiction. I mean, it happens, of course, but let's be honest, it's one of the worst paying job. So be ready to have another job, or be ready to, I don't know, write different things. There are so many things that you can write. I mean, I see so many brilliant writers who are also script writers for series, and there's so much need for writing in many fields, even in companies. Companies need storytellers. What I'm always a bit surprised, and I mean, it's great, they are young writers, I'm not saying, but you can't just start afresh. I mean, it's just because financially it's difficult. So you need to have a whole picture. But if you know that writing is what, I mean, writing, let's say a novel like I'm doing, is your goal, keep it, work on it, you know, keep space for it, cultivate it. You know, it might be just something aside for a moment, but there will come a time and circumstances in life that will, you know, allow you to do it. But it will take time before you can make a living. So if it's really something that you want to do, don't give it up, but try to build the rest of your career around it. That it allows you time, maybe, or because it will nourish your writing. That's very important. And I think, anyway, any experience brings a lot of flesh to your writing. And I'm always impressed. And I mean, some writers are just so talented, being so young and able to speak from life. They're bigger than, you know, their writing is bigger than their life. And but I think you won't waste your time doing something else. But then keep your goal. And my second advice is, and it goes directly afterwards, is writing is a bit like having faith. It's, you know, it comes with a lot of doubts. It comes with a lot of dark times. It comes with a lot of, you know, self-doubts. But because you have self-doubts, then it's hard for people around you to have faith in you if yourself you don't have faith. So to convince your family and friends that you're going to be a writer, you know, it's difficult if yourself you're not convinced, because, you know, before you can really show up a book, it's going to take time. So you really need to believe in it, and stick to it, because it's hard. There's a lot of, I mean, I lack confidence, definitely. I never really thought I could be a writer. I've never seen myself as a creative person before. So, you know, it took a lot of time to convince myself. Even today, I'm not 100, you know, some days I'm like, wow, you know. So, you know, what is mainly important is what's what counts for you. If you have it deep down in your guts that this is what you need to do, stick to it. Allow yourself time, believe in it, make people believe in yourself, and continue. Don't give it up. It might take years, but one day it will be up in the shelves of a bookstore. So yeah,
it's amazing. Please show us your book again. I love the title page is gorgeous. Les Accords Silencieux, Marie-Diane Meissirel. So wonderful to have an opportunity to speak with you. What a pleasure to kick off the Jobcast podcast with you. And we can't wait to see what your next book is going to be all about. So we'll be following you, of course, on Instagram and your journey outside of that as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ariana. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.